On the pavement, in Festive Road, a group of children were playing cowboys and Indians. Number 52 is Mr. Benn's house. Mr. Benn was indoors reading a newspaper. He read that a cowboy film was showing at the cinema. Mr. Benn liked cowboy films, and he decided to go and see it. When he reached the cinema, he saw a long queue of people waiting to go in. What a crowd, thought Mr. Benn. I'll never get in to see the film. Never mind. I'll be a cowboy. I'll go to that special costume shop. Inside the shop, as if by magic, the shopkeeper appeared. "Good morning, sir," he said. "You look as if you know which costume you want today." "Yes," said Mr. Benn, "the cowboy outfit." "Certainly, sir," said the shopkeeper. Mr. Benn took the outfit into the fitting room. Inside the room, he changed into the outfit. Looked at himself in the mirror as he usually did, and then went through the door that could lead to an adventure. Outside, Mr. Benn found himself in a rocky landscape. From behind a large pile of rocks, he could see little clouds of smoke. He went over to the pile of rocks, climbed up, and peeped over the top. The smoke was coming from a fire. A red Indian was waving a blanket so that the smoke from the fire made different patterns. Smoke signals, thought Mr. Benn, and he looked to see who the Indian was signaling to. In the distance, he saw a town of wooden houses. A cowboy town, thought Mr. Benn. I don't expect the Indian is signaling to them. Then he saw some more little clouds of smoke. They came from a group of Indian tents. Wigwams, the Indians called them. Mr. Benn decided to have a closer look. When he reached the village, he kept out of sight behind one of the wigwams. He could hear the sound of drums. Carefully, he looked to see what was happening. He saw a group of Indians dancing round a pole, a totem pole. The totem pole was carved and brightly painted. Mr. Benn looked at it carefully. It was the first one he'd ever seen.
Redskins, Redskins will beat the Cowboys today. We'll beat the Cowboys today.
The Indians were shouting as they danced.
Redskins will beat the Cowboys today. We'll beat the Cowboys today. Redskins, Redskins will beat the Cowboys today. Redskins, Redskins,
A war dance, thought Mr. Benn. I must warn the cowboys in the town.
Beat the Cowboys today. Redskins, Redskins, Redskins will beat the Cowboys today.
Nearby were some horses. Mr. Benn took one and rode off. In the town, Mr. Benn fired his gun to attract attention. The door of the jail opened and the sheriff looked out. "Look out! The Indians are coming," called Mr. Benn. "They say they're going to beat you today." "We're ready," said the sheriff. "They will probably beat us. They always do. Still, it's a good game." "Game?" said Mr. Benn. "The hide-and-seek game, of course," said the sheriff. "Every week, the Indians play hide-and-seek with us cowboys. An Indian and a cowboy both hide. Then the Indian team looks for the cowboy, and the cowboy team looks for the Indian. The team to find the hider first wins. Every week the same thing happens. The Indian vanishes and we never find him. Sometimes the Indians don't find the cowboy, but even then it's only a draw. We never win." Just then, the Indians arrived. They smiled and waved and said they were ready to beat the cowboys again. "May I play?" asked Mr. Benn. "Sure," said the sheriff. "You can be the man to run off and hide." The two teams lined up opposite each other. At one end stood the Indian chief and the sheriff. They were the judges. At the other end stood Mr. Benn and the Indian who was going to hide. "Ready," called the sheriff. Both teams knelt down and closed their eyes. "Go," said the chief, and Mr. Benn and the Indian ran off to hide. The sheriff and the chief began counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Mr. Benn peeped over the edge of the rock where he was hiding. In the sand below, he could see his own footprints. "Oh dear," he thought. "Anyone could follow those and find me easily. I must find somewhere else to hide." He looked around. Near the Indian village was a wood. Mr. Benn had an idea. He ran towards the wood, making sure that he was leaving a good trail of footprints for the Indians to follow. When he reached the wood, he climbed into a tree. Mr. Benn's idea was to cross the wood by moving from tree to tree along the branches, so that he wouldn't leave any footprints on the ground for the Indians to follow. When he reached the other side of the wood, he was very near the wigwams. The next part of the plan was to walk backwards to the wigwams with bare feet. Now it will look as if someone with bare feet has walked from the Indian village to the woods, he thought. The village is the last place they will look for me. Mr. Benn hid in one of the wigwams. Through a slit in the side, he could see the totem pole. It looked even taller than he remembered it. There were the heads, the animals, the fish, the large bird, and the Indian on top. The Indian on top? That wasn't there before. It was an Indian, all right. The Indian who was hiding from the cowboys.
95,
Back at the start, the counting had
98,
almost finished.
99,
100. The teams rushed off to find Mr. Benn and the Indian. The Indians easily followed Mr. Benn's footprints to the wood. But at the wood, it seemed that he had just disappeared. Meanwhile, the cowboys had followed the Indian to the village, but they just couldn't find him anywhere. Inside the wigwam, Mr. Benn had been busy. He'd tied a feather to the end of a long stick. Now he was ready to carry out his next plan. Suddenly, from above the cowboys, came a laugh. The cowboys looked up and shouted with delight. They had found the Indian. Then they saw the stick with the feather. And Mr. Benn came out of the wigwam. The sheriff said, "You tricked the Indians when you hid, and you found the hiding Indian. You won the game for us. Thanks to you, we won for the first time ever. You deserve a prize." And he gave Mr. Benn his badge. And when Mr. Benn asked the Indians if they would do their dance for him, even they were happy. Suddenly, a man appeared. He asked Mr. Benn to show him where he had hidden. Mr. Benn went back into the wigwam, and as he did so, he found himself back in the fitting room of the shop. Mr. Benn changed back into his own clothes. He went back into the shop and returned the cowboy outfit. "Thank you," he said to the shopkeeper. "May I keep the sheriff's badge?" "Of course you may, sir. You earned it," said the shopkeeper. Back in Festive Road, the children were now playing hide and seek. At his gate, Mr. Benn looked at the sheriff's badge. He wouldn't forget that game as long as he had the badge to remind him.